You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. Welcome back, BOOKSTORM Podcast listeners. You are going to be very excited about who we have with us here today because you've been writing in for quite some time now, asking for CJ Box because of your love for his Joe Pickett series. And let me say, BOOKSTORM is thrilled to have him here because we now are dispersing this podcast with listeners in 44 countries, almost 50 states, in 580 cities. Thank you, loyal listeners. We are bringing you the best fiction out there. So let me just say, CJ, welcome. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you. It's just my pleasure. I'm going to enjoy this, I think.
You definitely will. We're going to dive down deep and ask you some questions, hopefully, that you haven't been asked before. But let me tell our listeners a little bit about you because they love your books, but maybe they don't know what else you have going on there, which is quite a bit. CJ is the #1 New York Times best-selling author in many award-winning novels. He's created the suspense fiction's most enduring and, I have to say, endearing protagonist, Wyoming game warden Joe Pickett. He's an everyman hero with a penchant for stepping into trouble. Did you know, listeners, that CJ Box has written 22 Joe Pickett novels? We're here today to talk about the 23rd novel, Storm Watch, out on February 28th. He has 8 standalone novels and a story collection. Now, he's won so many awards. I don't have time to mention them all, but I have to talk about a few. The Edgar, the Anthony, the McCavity, Gumshoe, 2 Barry Awards, French Prix Calibre, the Western Heritage Award for Literature, 2 Spur Awards. And as if that's not enough, he's an avid outdoorsman. He hunts, fishes, hikes, rides, and has skied throughout Wyoming and the Mountain West. And in case you don't know, Joe Pickett is a television series that Kristen and I and our kids are hooked on. We adore it. It stars Michael Dorman, David Allen Greer, Sharon Lawrence, Mustafa Speaks, and CJ is the executive producer. It airs on Paramount Plus, and we've seen it on Spectrum Original. Also, in addition to this, he's got the David E. Kelly's ABC series based on his book, Big Sky. It's the Cassie dual novels, and it currently airs on ABC TV. Joe Pickett, I think I just saw this week, has been renewed for a 2nd season. Congratulations, well-deserved, and we're all very super excited about that, CJ. Thrilled to have you here today to talk about Storm Watch. Kristen and I are just loved it. We're longtime fans.
Thank you so much.
Well, CJ, we like to give our listeners a little bit of the background on your story. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to summarize just a little bit. And if you want to add anything, please do. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, which is a little tricky with your stories, but I'm going to go ahead and do my best. First of all, the backdrop. We talked about Joe Pickett. He is a game warden in 12 Sleep, Wyoming, and it's a town where nearly everyone hunts. And the game warden, especially one like Joe Pickett, who is not going to take bribes or look the other way, is far from popular. But in this story in particular, Storm Watch, an epic spring snowstorm is on the way, And Joe Pickett is out. He makes a very surprising discovery while he is hunting down a wounded elk that is in his district. But he stumbles upon a secret, remote, high-tech facility right in the middle of a remote ranch. As he gets closer, it's clear that a brutal crime has taken place. Now, Joe believes there's a connection to his responsibilities within his jurisdiction. And as he attempts to learn more, his investigation is thwarted on every level by federal agents, extremists, and even Governor Coulter Allen. His friend, Nate Romanowski, is rebuilding his falconry company and financing it through crypto mining with the assistance of his friend Geronimo Jones. Well, Nate is approached by a shadowy group of local militant activists. They're gaining power, they're gaining influence, and one of the things they're pressing for is Wyoming and other Western states to maybe secede from the Union, even by force if necessary. And they asked Nate to throw in with them. Now, Nate's a little wary, but there are storms brewing on every level, including even within the relationship between Nate and Joe Pickett. Would you love to add anything there? Or
no, it all sounds so complicated. Hopefully it doesn't read that way, but no.
Well, if you're ready, then we'll go ahead and we'll brave the storm, and Chris will kick us off.
We're going to brave the storm because we are so excited. And I was telling CJ before we got started, I read this book during the biggest generational blizzard of Western New York State. Could have been more perfect timing. And I want to talk about we're going to get into some deep issues, but let's just go on the surface here a little bit, because for our listeners who maybe haven't read CJ Box, all of his novels in this popular series will transport you to the absolute beauty and wonder of Wyoming through the heart of this beloved protagonist and game warden, Joe Pickett. He's tirelessly protecting the wildlife, the wolf, the elk, the land, the bear. And through his friend, Nate Romanowski, who we've grown to love, and his expertise in falconry, we are transported to a very different world than most of us live in, a very beautiful world. And I can't help but ask you, CJ, tell us more as the writer and as someone who lives native of Wyoming and obviously has a love for that state, why you have included the wildlife and the land so strongly in all of your stories. I have a feeling this is very important to you.
Sure it is. As you mentioned, I grew up in Wyoming. We live on a little in southern Wyoming. I can look out the window right now and see elk. They're out there in the snow. So I try, I guess, two answers to your question. One is, I think it's authentic to the place and to Joe Pickett's livelihood as a game warden. Of course, he's out. These are all outdoor-based books. But at the same time, I grew up reading everything I could find. We don't have very many people in this state, like 600,000. That's it in a state the size of France. So we don't have a lot of people, but the landscape plays an unduly large role in everyone's lives, I think. Most people are, where I live, for example, people really do greet each other by saying, "Did you get your elk yet?" Throughout the entire fall. And I grew up reading a lot of books about Wyoming or about the Mountain West. And most of them at the time were written by people who had either vacationed here or driven through or moved to Jackson Hole. They didn't seem authentic to me, to the kind of life I knew and the issues and controversies in the state. And I always thought if I ever wrote a book, I wanted to make it more authentic to the place so that people who lived here and read it wouldn't say, "I don't know this. I don't know these characters. I don't know this place. Who are these people?" It seems like the rural South, not the Mountain West. So that was always my goal. Luckily, I think that has resonated with readers not only in the state, but around the country and around the world, thank goodness. So I try to be as accurate as I can about the culture, the issues, the many themes. And I get a lot of information and a lot of ideas by just walking around, listening, going to the post office every day, listening to what people are talking about. And, I wouldn't have it any other way. I would never set books in urban areas, because although I have been in them, I'm not an expert. There's plenty of people to do that. So what I want to do is at least render my part of the world as accurately as I can.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what you're doing. So the old adage, you write what you know. It's clear to the reader that you are an expert on Wyoming and that you have a love for the country. And even though your books, for those listeners who haven't read them, deal with much deeper issues than just the landscape, we're dealing with some pretty deep life issues in these stories that resonate with the readers. It's so clear that you know what you're talking about. You're an expert on this state, and we thank you for that. You've transported us to a place that we wish we could go.
Well, I guess the only thing I would maybe mention is I love the fact that you say how beautiful it is and nature and thing, but it's pretty harsh as well. I don't try to make everything like Bambi. It's a pretty rough world out there, and it's there's a lot of circle of life issues with all of the predators and the prey and the hunters and carnivores, large carnivores in the woods, that kind of thing. So I try to show both sides.
Absolutely. Love it.
CJ, I wanted to ask you about a subject that really leapt out to me and a theme throughout your story. You bring up the idea that there's people who unite over shared beliefs or shared agendas, and then there are elites behind those groups who are stoking that fervor, maybe for their own, perhaps corrupt purposes. And some of those elites are very shadowy. They're behind the scenes. They're very well funded. And I saw a lot of context today where potentially that theme is resonating very strongly. And I wanted to ask you, how does an everyday person like a Joe Pickett stand a chance when we're dealing with these very powerful elites who might be running the show or using people for their own purposes?
I'm not sure I know how to answer how do you handle it, other than what Joe Pickett tries to do always is do the right thing. It's kind of old fashioned. It's it's certainly not edgy to say that, but Joe Pickett tries to do his job, and once he gets involved in a situation, will follow it through, even if it leads places where everybody's saying don't go there, drop it, that you don't have to do that. But that's probably the one unique thing about him, because he's not somebody who can beat everybody up or wow a crowd. He just does the right thing. He pursues it. He tries to do his job. But a lot of these, when you say larger issues and elites and things, I think what's unique about this world, Joe Pickett's world, and it's also unique to Wyoming, is that this state, the size of France, half of it is owned by the federal government and administered by federal bureaucrats. So although it's out in the middle of nowhere, it's very much affected by politics, by whoever's in the White House, and even more so, whoever is the Secretary of the Interior. Because policies change sometimes every 4 years. Suddenly, the economy will change based on what they're saying in Washington. So therefore, there is that kind of involvement in day-to-day issues in states like Wyoming that do not occur in other parts of the country, because other parts of the country are not administered by the federal government.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In fact, the idea of BLM land, Bureau of Land Management land, is a very foreign concept in the East.
Sure.
Most people have never even heard that that's the fact. But, when you travel out West, and as you point out in your story, people can camp, they could use that space, but it is still administered by the federal government. And you're right, those policies really shape the direction of how that land can be used. And we see tensions, like in your story, between people trying to push the economy in one direction versus another, cattle ranchers versus other groups of people. So that's one of the things I've loved about your stories, because you do address those political motivations and the often conflicting interests that people in any location would have, but particularly when resources are involved.
Right. And it's, I try not to ever write agenda books. But I always try to, when writing about a controversial topic, portray both sides, and I trust the reader to come down where they will. And there's so many agendas and so many narratives out there. One of the things you mentioned that I found fascinating, for example, the crypto mining issue, that really does exist. Those little facilities really do exist in the middle of nowhere, and without giving away any spoilers, but just like everything, there's so many different sides to that. The people who crypto mine require a lot of energy. Most people don't realize that. Most people think of it as kind of clean and distant and high tech and kind of cool, except when it collapses, of course. But they don't realize that the business of cryptocurrency is a huge use of energy, and that's got to come from somewhere.
Yep. It's also very loud and disruptive, even to wildlife. So yeah, you raised so many fantastic, interesting points in your story, but all going back to the original part of the question. And that is Joe Pickett, you could easily give up because of futility and the frustration of taking on City Hall. And that's one of the things about this character that has spoken to people through the years. He doesn't give up.
Right. And Joe Pickett has matured. I mean, the stories, the books have all taken place in real time since the very first one, which was in 2000. Joe Pickett was 34 years old then. But even in the very first book, Open Season, that is about, in fact, the Endangered Species Act, and how well-meaning legislation can sometimes go awry on the ground where it's supposed to benefit those there. And so it's been kind of a constant theme since the very first book.
And we appreciated that as readers, because not only are you being entertained with the story here, we were learning something. I didn't know all about that crypto mining, and it was eye-opening and very intriguing to me. Shocking too, in a way, really interesting. Kind of leads me into my next question here. The story also, without giving spoilers, it unfolds a lot of plots and schemes, some hidden, some obvious, between groups in your book, like the Sovereign Nation, the Keystoners, local law enforcement, state and federal authorities. And as the reader, I couldn't help but look at each of these groups and think they each possessed a very strong ideology and belief system. They were sometimes willing to break the law in order to win. And I just couldn't help but think, we sometimes all have the potential for that. We start out with a really good cause. We get so caught up in the fight of it that all we care about is winning, and we forget why we're doing it to begin with. And I wondered, were you trying to show that at all to the reader about the power, the danger of absolute power and its tendency toward corruption coming from both good and evil?
Yes, absolutely. I kind of deal with it. There's a lot of extremes in this book, and I wanted them all to clash and to kind of expose the extremes on both sides in a way, so that where it first appears, it's all ideological by these groups. It's then revealed that there's more behind that, and people behind that who are trying to, in fact, impress their philosophy or narrative on others. So it's kind of touchy. It's kind of hard to do, I think, without making just caricatures out of characters in the books. But by giving them the opportunity to explain themselves, again, let the reader come down where they will.
And we noticed that, Kristen and I, that you're not forcing your own opinion here, because sometimes I read the book, I thought, what is CJ? What does he believe? And you're very neutral. You're showing us the characters and letting us decide. And we both found that. And thank you for that, giving the reader the credit to make their own mind up. We like that.
Sure. I mean, I'm a reader too. And I really put off when I read novels, especially with an agenda, where everything is slanted one direction, where the other side is always portrayed as kind of cartoon villains. I think it's much more interesting to give them nuance, and to not, no one wants to be lectured for 300 pages about something, about the author's point of view or political view. I certainly don't, on either side. So I try not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to press in just a little bit more on that issue. We were talking about how, of course, your novels include themes of environmentalism and conservation, and environmental protection wasn't always a political issue. That's more of a recent kind of phenomenon. It used to be bipartisan. I mean, a lot of our legislation was introduced by President Nixon and approved by a bipartisan Congress.
Sure.
Many of your characters, though, start to tie together some of their environmental issues with political beliefs or even Second Amendment rights. And they had this mentality of us versus them, either or. And I was wondering if you think that Joe Pickett views the environment from that political viewpoint. And if not, why not? Is it a political issue, the environment?
Unfortunately, I think it is, but it doesn't need to be, like you said. It's just like, people have different views of what the science says, and therefore everything has to be done along their dogmas, where, all of these kinds of issues have many different sides. There's so many trade-offs, but nobody wants to talk about those. And I try to explore some of those, energy consumption, energy use. Where does energy come from? Again, back to the kind of federal ownership of the West. And people get jerked back and forth on whether producing energy is good or producing energy is evil. And it changes every few years. And the reaction to that kind of change really does radicalize some people. The largest wind farm project in the entire world is going on within 40 miles of where I live. And some people find out about that. So that's wonderful. Well, all of that energy is going to California. None of it's staying here. And the reason it's going there is because California has mandated it. But there's also downsides to wind energy production. A lot of dead eagles, a lot of dead birds, a lot of dead bats, a lot of disruption of the landscape. So you can't really talk about the benefits without talking about some of the harms as well.
Absolutely. And it's not a black and white issue, as you talked about, or an us versus them. I mean, even the 6,000 parts that go into wind turbines becomes important because they are all manufactured using energy processes. So I love what you said. And I love that Joe Pickett really tries to examine facts and go back to, from a conservation mindset, how do we solve this problem? And that's very instructive, especially today.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you. I think Joe Pickett is not particularly deep that way. He's just trying to do what he's supposed to do, be a game warden, and he has a set of rules and regulations that he needs to enforce. But by doing that, he often rubs some people the wrong way and certainly offends some interests by doing what he's supposed to do.
And we like when he does that, because we can all relate to this Joe Pickett. So you said Joe doesn't enter every fight with an agenda other than to do the right thing. I read somewhere that someone said, it's a fatal flaw. Wish him luck. But we can all relate to it. I love that he doesn't have always the expertise or the super strength or the superhero. He's just a regular guy like all of us trying to do the right thing. So I got to ask you this. and I know you've probably asked it a million times. The New York Times says CJ Box introduced us to his unlikely hero, a game warden named Joe Pickett, a decent guy, lives paycheck to paycheck, deeply fond of his wife and his 3 daughters. Okay, CJ Box has a wife and 3 daughters. Are you Joe Pickett? A little bit of you in him?
I am not, but, I think, for every author, there are parts of, you can't write about a character, a believable character, without having some kind of empathy or some kind of experience in that. So I think, there are parts of me in every character, good and bad. But no, I'm a much better shot than Joe Pickett.
Well, we are super excited for the second season, Joe Pickett. Both of us and our families, we're huge followers. Just saying to BOOKSTORM listeners on YouTube and all across the world, you're going to want to read this 23rd book. Even if you haven't read the prior books, this Stormwatch is going to leave you changed. It's a life-changing book. It's a book that matters. It's a book that entertains. And you're going to see a little something of yourself in that story. Now, before we leave, not that you need to be working on anything else because you're pretty busy, but can you give us a glimpse of anything else that you might be thinking about writing or doing? What's on your radar?
I'm not intimately involved, not day-to-day involved with the 2 TV series by any means. But I'm particularly fond of the Joe Pickett series. I think they're doing a great job. I went able to go to the set for season 2 and can't wait for it to come out. So I'm somewhat involved with that. But I am, I'm working on the next Joe Pickett book right now, and got a great start on it. I'm really excited about it. It will be hard to go on tour for Stormwatch and not talk about the new one, because that's always the case. That's what's in my mind at the time. But I'm looking forward to the release of this new book and the tour that goes along with it.
Excellent. We're glad number 24 is on the way, and we can't wait for that. So listeners, please connect with CJ Box. You can find him on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And it has been an absolute pleasure diving down deep with you into this great story. Just love talking to you today, CJ.
Thanks. Me too. I like those kind of deep questions, as opposed to where do you get your ideas kind of stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great talking to CJ Box here today, because we are huge fans. And so please, if you haven't read his books, pick it up. If you haven't seen the Joe Pickett series, you've got to check it out. You're going to love it. The ending was phenomenal. Can't give any spoilers, but it was amazing. And what else do you want to talk about here? There's so many things to still talk about, Kristen.
Oh my gosh, this was all up my alley. I loved every single thing that we were talking about. Well, a couple things really leapt out at me. We talked a great deal about the fact that, the environment and issues relating to the environment can become very political. And this was something that really spoke to me, because the environment shouldn't be political. Clean air, clean water, clean soil. Those are things that affect every one of us. We need clean air to live. We need clean water to live. And when they become polluted or contaminated or scarce, that affects everybody. And therefore, it's an everybody issue. It's not a political issue. But I would say since Ronald Reagan days, we have not been able to separate politics from environmental issues. And it almost takes a book like this to really bring that home, because everyone in this book is dependent upon the environment for various reasons, whether it was ranching, hunting, falconry. And you can see where people of all different persuasions were interacting with the natural world, were dependent upon it, and needed it to be functioning.
Mm-hmm. And just for those of us who aren't even experts on the environment, the love of nature. Like for me, just reading this book and the description of nature and the wildlife and the beauty of it. And then, as CJ Box said, the danger of it, the intrigue of it. I love the character. This was shocking to me, this Joe Pickett character, because I always thought a game warden, oh, What a luxurious, easygoing job out there in the wilderness, watching, make sure wildlife is safe. No, I read this about game wardens. They are involved in just about every major event or situation that involves the outdoors, the rough edges of the rural New World. They're trained and armed like law enforcement. Every human being they encounter is armed. They're out there in 5,000 miles alone. There is no backup, and it's a dangerous job. That character, Joe Pickett, and what he does, as simple as a character and as honest and genuine as a character that he is, he puts his life on the line all the time. I think that was a cool nod to people like game wardens who work out there, that CJ Box opened our eyes to a whole different world that we don't know about.
Oh, yeah. Plus, when there's a lot of pressure to look away or to, maybe take a bribe. And let me tell you something. I have seen an elk up close. And you talk about dangerous and not something to be messed with. I was absolutely flabbergasted when I saw the size of these magnificent creatures. And that's not even the bears and other creatures and mountain lions that they encounter and wolves. But, and I think your point is a good one. These are people who are the front line of some of our environmental protection, and the forces working on them. There's a lot of money at stake. There's a lot of interest at stake.
And it got brought up in this book, a lot of issues. It's deep, it's eye-opening, it's educational. There's a lot more to this book than meets the eye.
Yeah.
I have seen an elk in Alaska once. I think CJ said this before he went on the air, but we said to him, he gave a little clip it before we could see his face on the Zoom. And it was a picture of Wyoming. And he said, that's outside my window. And he said, right now I'm looking at a few elk out there in the snow. And we thought, how cool was that?
Well, I love the West. So for me, I was longing to see what he was looking at. To me, my happy place is Utah and Colorado and Northern Arizona. It's amazing.
Beautiful, amazing country. So if you want to be transported to Wyoming, you want to see what it feels like, what it smells like, what it sounds like, check out CJ Box, Joe Pickett series, February 28th release. This podcast will be aired that exact day, and you'll be able to buy Stormwatch. So until then, listeners, thanks for joining us. We're so happy to be here. Shout out to you-know-who. He's a household name by now. There he is, Mr. Mark Carey, the brains behind what we do here. Thank you, Mark.
Hope you guys enjoyed the show today. We'll see you again next week.
We did, Mark, thanks to you. And guess who we have coming up? Keep listening, because we have Pam Jenoff, codename Sapphire, Chris Bojalian, the Lioness, Mary Kubica, just the nicest couple, and our friend of Bookstorm, who's been on before, coming out with her next book that will transport you to India, Alka Yoshi with the Perfumist of Paris.
In the meantime, listeners, stay on the radar with Bookstorm by visiting our website at BOOKSTORMPodcast.com. You can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, and Twitter. And of course, you can look at YouTube and see us and our authors if you would like to have that experience as well. Just search for Bookstorm and Podcast, and we should come right up. And until next time, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.